Today's topic is going to be about a company that we all know and love, yet they are a suckling little greedy little bastard that always comes up and pretty much sucks all of our wallets dry. Yet, no matter how abusive the relationship is, us, the consumers, are always crawling back to this company. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about fucking Nintendo. Now, for people who don't know, or for people who are in denial and dick ride Nintendo to the end, Nintendo is a very, very greedy company. And why do I say that? Well, it's the way they manage their business and as well as the way they manage their products. So Nintendo essentially owns a monopoly over their own games, which I guess it makes sense, right? Microsoft has some of their own Microsoft-owned games in which they don't allow PlayStation to even port to their own console. But Nintendo doesn't allow any of their games to be ported to any other console, not PC, PlayStation, or Xbox at all. In order to play any Nintendo games, you have to buy a Nintendo console. Now, at first, this wasn't really a problem. You just had to buy a 3DS or a DSi or a Wii U or now even a Switch in order to play their games. There's no real issue with this kind of relationship between the consumer and Nintendo. After all, Nintendo games are fun, and I suppose it's quote-unquote worth it to buy a whole new console to play Nintendo games with your friends. However, the issue is that Nintendo is becoming a little bit more greedy nowadays. With the announcement of the Switch 2, they also announced the prices for the console and as well as for their games that are coming out with the Switch 2. They're pricing games at a base price of $80, and as well as setting up the price for the Nintendo Switch 2 to be about, I believe it's almost $500, about $450 if I'm correct. Now, Nintendo is usually always able to get away with shit like this because people are willing to get fucked in the ass by them simply because Nintendo games are fun. You want to play the new Pokemon game, even though it's a fucking shittier version of the last game? By all means, buy the new fucking Nintendo console. People love to play Nintendo games and they're willing to pay for a lot of money just to fucking play them. However, a lot of things have also changed within their user agreement, or their EULA, EULA, that a lot of people haven't noticed. We have seen a lot of people actually talk about it, but it's not really mainstream for what I can see. Now, what are these changes in their user agreement, you might ask? Well, there's two major changes. One has to do with the licensing of Nintendo products, and the other also has to do with essentially any kind of lawsuit from consumers to Nintendo. I won't speak too much on the lawsuit part as I didn't really read too much into it. I was more concerned and more interested in the whole licensing agreement that Nintendo has put. What I have seen and heard from this one YouTuber named Yang Ye, and I apologize if I butchered the name, but he has a video that I will link in the description where he talks about essentially how signing the user license agreement of Nintendo, their new one, their updated one that went into effect May 7th actually, that you waive your right to file a class action lawsuit against Nintendo. And I also, from the video, from what he spoke about, the only way to actually counter or to not agree to that condition within the user agreement, you have to send Nintendo a letter within 30 days of signing the user agreement. I recommend go checking out his video, as he also talks about some of the things I'm going to be talking about too, but he goes much more in depth into the whole class action lawsuit clause within Nintendo's user agreement. What I really want to talk about is the licensing of Nintendo's new user agreement, because it essentially allows Nintendo to reserve the right to brick your Nintendo Switch 2 console. That is right. If you violate any of the licensing laws, your console will be permanently unusable due to violations. Now, before we continue, I have been trying to find the old user agreement of Nintendo's, but I wasn't able to find it. I don't think I dig deep enough to find it. But essentially, from what I can understand, the user agreement for the licensing section is the same. They only just added a new paragraph or a new section to it. The old licensing agreement, from what I can understand, goes about like this. Subject to the terms of this agreement, Nintendo grants you a non-exclusive, non-transferable, recoverable license to use the Nintendo account services solely for your personal and non-commercial use. For clarity, the Nintendo account services are licensed, not sold to you, and you may not use of the Nintendo account services except as expressly authorized by this agreement. Now, from what I understand and from what I read, what this essentially old user agreement said or indicated that consumers can do is that they were not allowed to pirate or emulate any of the Nintendo products and licenses of Nintendo, which I suppose it makes sense. We saw a case a few years ago, I think it was a few years ago, video, I forgot what, where essentially this guy is essentially put himself into generational debt because he would sell, what was it, modded Nintendo Switches, and Nintendo essentially cracked down on him and just put him into generational debt via a lawsuit. I don't know if that really applies, that section of the user agreement applies to his case, but I do know Nintendo is like really cracks down when it comes to pirating, and they have been really cracking down when it comes to emulation. Is, if I remember correctly, it's because of Nintendo that Ryuzu and another emulation software has been shut down because of Nintendo. Now there is a lot more added to this section of the user agreement, as a whole new hefty head of words have been added to it. This is the part where it gets really, it's pretty, I don't want to say intense, but it's pretty crazy what they say in here. So here's what they say. Without limitation, you agree that you may not A, publish, copy, modify, reverse engineer, lease, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute, offer for sale, or create derivative works of any portion of the Nintendo account services. B, bypass, modify, decrypt, defeat, tamper with, or otherwise circumvent any of the functions or protections of the Nintendo account services, including through the use of any hardware or software that would cause Nintendo account services to operate other than in accordance with its documentation and intended use. C, obtain, install, or use any unauthorized copies of Nintendo account services. Or D, exploit the Nintendo account services in any manner other than to use them in accordance with the applicable documentation and its intended use. In each case, without Nintendo's written consent or express authorization, or unless otherwise expressly permitted by applicable law, you acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing restrictions, Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services and or the applicable Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part. Now, that is a lot of words, but what does that really mean? Well, it means that if you violate or you do anything such as pirating, emulating, I guess selling any kind of copies, illegal copies, which is just pirating again, Nintendo reserves the right to eliminate your Nintendo account and as well as to break your console. But it also states that if you tamper with the product or the hardware of the Nintendo Switch console or any of their products, you will also be in danger of having your console or your account rendered useless. Now, to me, this is crazy. I understand the whole piracy thing. I understand when it comes to modding video games or modding your console, sometimes it could lead you to getting banned. In fact, we'll get a little bit more into the history of that because we have seen that with the Xbox 360. But to me, it really blurs the line between consumer rights of owning the product they bought and as well as the licensing of the company which consumers bought it from. Because to me, it feels like, imagine this. You go to a car dealership, you buy a fucking car, I don't know, for $10,000, right? And you buy it for the full price, no leasing, no nothing, no checking your credit. You pay it all in cash, you take it out the lot, you go home, and let's say you install, I don't know, you install a turbo into it, or you change out part to make it better, right? The dealership in this case essentially has the right to remotely just brick your car. Your car just stops working because you swapped out hardware, or not hardware, or I guess it is hardware. You swapped out parts from the car that went against the user agreement essentially of the dealership, which is fucking crazy, right? You bought the car is now yours. You have the right to do whatever you want with the parts as long as it's following federal law. And here's the other thing too, most people, when they tamper with the hardware or software of Nintendo products or Nintendo consoles, they're not doing it in order to get some sort of multiplayer advantage amongst others. One of the reasons why people would mod the shit out of Nintendo Switches is because the hardware within Nintendo Switch was so fucking primitive. Stuck at 32 gigabytes. Are you fucking serious? It was just hard luck at a resolution of 720p, fucking 30 frames a second. This is why people would emulate most of Nintendo games onto their PC, because that way they would able to increase the frame rate, also increase the resolution, which would better the graphics of the games to make it look better, to make it more enjoyable compared to other consoles of today, especially primitive, especially like mobile consoles like the Steam Deck. Nintendo Switch is just so far behind. But the problem here is that Nintendo doesn't give a fuck the fact that Nintendo Switch hardware is far behind. And why they don't care is because people are going to buy Nintendo Switches or Nintendo consoles no matter what, because at the end of the day, you have to buy Nintendo consoles in order to play Nintendo games. And I kind of can't really blame, I can blame the consumer at this part, right? It's like staying in an abusive relationship at this point, but it's hard to blame them because Nintendo video games are actually really good. They make great fucking games and they always have have made great fucking games. Not all of them are the best, obviously, but they've always tried their best to make new games, and they're always usually either innovative or they're just a fresh breath of air on playing Nintendo games compared to a lot of the other AAA studios that are just producing slop nowadays. However, I don't think this justifies what Nintendo is doing in their user agreement. I think it's actually pretty insane. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I think it was an Ubisoft developer or someone within the Ubisoft company who essentially came out and said that gamers need to get more comfortable with the idea that they don't own the games that they buy. They're essentially just bought the license to play the fucking game, which to me is crazy. Now, it makes sense. To me, it's more applicable for digital purchases, right? As recently I think this past decade, I would say, the gaming industry has been moving a lot more from hard copies to digital copies of games. A lot of it has to do with Steam, because Steam is very easily accessible and honestly, a very good product when it comes to buying video games. But we've been seeing that kind of shift of this idea that people who play video games and you purchase video games, you don't really own the game anymore. We saw this with think like this past year or past last year, we saw games that been shut down, and when essentially the studios shut down and took it off Steam essentially took away the game from people's library and just refunded them the money they bought the game. Now, that's not really a problem because the consumers were able to get refunded based off what they paid for the game. However, the issue is that they're able to do that whenever they want to any game within the library, which is fucking insane. Being banned from a video game that's heavily multiplayer is one thing, but to have the game just taken away from you, even though you bought it, is pretty insane to me. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of people have been bringing up essentially European Union laws, because European Union laws tend to be very protective when it comes to consumers. And I looked into it, and apparently this whole new user agreement license section for Nintendo is only visible within the United States. Any other country that falls within the European Union laws don't have this clause in their user agreement at all, which I guess it could either show the extent that the US is willing to do to protect their consumers. But we can take a look at the union laws, the European Union laws, and kind of just see, we could take just a brief look to see what they're talking about. Now, there's 3 documents that I found that kind of correlate to this when I was doing a bit of research into it. I'll link them into the description below. I'll also link into the articles or the kind of the pages to where I was looking at. But we can look at this first one, Council Directive 93-93/13/EEC on unfair terms in consumer contracts. We're looking at specifically in Article 3, where unfair terms in consumer contracts. Section 1, a contractual term which has not been individually negotiated shall be regarded as unfair if, contrary to the requirement of good faith, it causes a significant imbalance in the parties' rights and obligations arising under the contract to detriment of the consumer. In plain English, this is essentially saying that the contract was written by a company without the input of the consumer. You essentially, in this case, Nintendo is the company, and the consumer is a regular person buying a product of Nintendo. And if it gives unfair power balance in favor of the company, in this case Nintendo, then that term is automatically suspicious and be declared unfair, especially, as I mentioned before, if it puts like the consumer at a disadvantage. Section 2 of it, a term shall always be regarded as not individually negotiated where it has been drafted in advance and the consumer has therefore not been able to influence the substance of the term, particularly in the context of a pre-formulated standard contract. What this means that if the contract was pre-made and the consumer can't negotiate it, then it's considered not negotiated. Most online user agreements are actually like this. It's like a long display of fucking user agreement rights, and you're not going to read through all that. You're not going to read the fucking paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. That's how they get to you, essentially. Even if one part of the contract was negotiated, if the rest wasn't, it still counts as a standard contract. If the company claims you negotiated a term, it's their job to prove that. So Nintendo essentially just can't claim that you agreed fairly to this unless they prove you had real negotiating power, because realistically, most of the time when it comes to these user agreements, no consumer has the negotiating power in order to negotiate with a multi-million, or in this case billion-dollar company. Because of the European Union laws, Nintendo, you did not agree to this, you did not negotiate with this. This gives a huge power imbalance between the consumer and Nintendo. And because of this case, any European countries, any consumers within the European countries will not be eligible to have their console be bricked. Now, to be essentially their accounts terminated, well, that's a different thing, right? Being banned, getting your account banned is usually always the case in most consoles. Now, to me, it seems very dangerous. As I mentioned before, it could easily be like a thin line between the whole of a consumer owning the video game and between the company licensing the video game. And as I said before, it seems like the gaming industry is really moving towards this idea that consumers or gamers do not own any of the products that they buy, rather they are just simply buying the license to play this. Now, what's interesting is that, as I mentioned before, this is not the first time we see something like this. Back in the day, Microsoft would implement this kind of thing with their Xbox 360. They wouldn't break the device, but what they would do, essentially, they would ban the IP of the console, but they would essentially ban your IP, which means that you would not be able to play Xbox online with wherever you are living at. Essentially, the console was remained fully usable offline, so in that case it's not fully bricked. You just couldn't do anything on Xbox Live. Now, the reason why they would do this though was because it was supposed to be an enforcement on terms of piracy and cheating prevention, as well as kind of modded consoles for Xbox Live, right? I suppose there's these cases where you mod a console and it will give you advantages in multiplayer games, and that would be considered cheating, and so in that case they would implement this whole IP ban onto your console. However, Nintendo's terms of service goes further, as they explicitly tell you that they have the right to disable the entire system, even offline use. Now, what are the justifications for this, right? I suppose the justifications could just be to combat piracy, emulation, right? Some are saying that they probably have this kind of terms and conditions to be very harsh as deterrents rather than an actual routine enforcement. They're not gonna come knocking everybody's fucking door like Hasbro's did with the fucking Pinkerton gang to fucking ban or brick everybody's device. Rather just have that as a deterrent and within the terms and conditions to wear off people who are going to be violating the terms and conditions. However, I just feel like it's just it just seems unfair to me. A lot of gaming studios or gaming companies, when they try to combat piracy, they're kind of missing the whole point. In my opinion, at least, from what I can see, piracy is not really an issue because people don't want to pay for video games. Piracy is an issue because it's a service problem. As Gabe Newell said, the president of Valve Corporation, we think there is a fundamental misconception about piracy. Piracy is always almost a service problem and not a pricing problem. And I think that holds true to a lot of Nintendo's products. As I mentioned before, Nintendo products are very bottom of the barrel when it comes to hardware and capability. And Nintendo, with their whole online Nintendo services as well, is also kind of a pain in the ass. Their games being hard locked at 30 frames a second, their fucking resolution or the graphic is just being at 720p the whole fucking time. Even though the Nintendo Switch 2 is going up in frame rate, I understand that it's also going up in resolution, but it's crazy that they took them this long to do something like that. And to my opinion, it just seems like a lot of that's the reason why people pirate Nintendo games. It's also the reason why people emulate Nintendo games. It's not because they don't want to pay it, it's because Nintendo's service, it just fucking sucks. Nintendo as a service fucking sucks. As a gaming company, they make great fucking games. Console wise, the Nintendo Switch has been, in my opinion, very lackluster when it comes to hardware. Falling behind, I suppose they're able to stay behind because it's Nintendo. Everybody wants a fucking Nintendo game. In order to play Nintendo games, you have to own a Nintendo console. But that's about it. That's all I kind of have on this topic. So yeah, that's about it. See ya.
Stay by yourself and don't look for attention. They come at you wrong, they come with extensions. Standing on 10 if you like it or not. Pray to a bag and don't pray to a reverend. The profits for them, they ain't talking for God. Mama told me don't worry, bitches is dirty. I seen it in you from a mile away. You thinking you curvy, desperate and thirsty, so I had to leave and be right on my way. You told me to go and you thought I would stay, but you didn't know how I'm feeling today. Lies that you try to throw